Sudan's military has reinstated Prime Minister Abdalla Hamdok on Sunday. They have announced the release of all political detainees after weeks of deadly unrest triggered by a coup. Under an agreement signed with military leader General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, Hamdok will lead a civilian government of technocrats for a transitional period. Hamdok said he had agreed to the deal to stop the bloodshed, but the civilian coalition that shared power with the military previously said that it opposed any talks with the putschists and called for protests to continue on Sunday. Even as news of the deal spread, thousands of protesters marched towards the presidential palace in Khartoum in the early afternoon and called for the downfall of Burhan. And to discuss the latest developments, we are now joined by the Professor of Citizenship and Public Affairs at the Syracuse University, Dr. Jok Madut Jok. He joins us now via Zoom from New York in the United States. Dr. Jok, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Is the latest developments a turning point for Sudan?
Thank you, sir, for having me again. Good to be back. No, the situation in Sudan continues to puzzle a lot of people. Prime Minister Abdalla Hamdok and the military leader Abdel Fattah al-Burhan have agreed to resume the joint coalition government, which the al-Burhan overthrew on the 25th of October. To resume a structure where Hamdok will run a technocratic government and the military council will remain in place. I think what I can see happening is that the Al-Millionaire, the so-called 1 million persons protest, will continue for one reason, which is that they did not want Hamdok to sign this agreement once again with the military, and that what they want is the military gone, and that they are not going to relent until this has been realized, because the military wrecked the process just short of transitioning away from it in order to let the civilian government lead the country for the remainder of the interim period until elections. And so having done this, the professional associations and the civilian leaders who toppled al-Bashir in 2019 are now saying that the military has done the unthinkable. Therefore, no room for negotiation, no room for agreement. In fact, they are calling Hamdok on this agreement, saying that he has made a mistake. I think he did make a mistake for not including the leaders of protest in these negotiations.
Well, Dr. Jok, the civilian coalition that nominated Mr. Hamdok as Prime Minister 2 years ago has refused to acknowledge any new deal. What does this mean for this new agreement? I mean, is it an indication that it won't be a smooth transition?
Well, Hamdok said that he agreed to this deal in order to stop continued bloodshed. You will remember 15 people have been shot dead by the military during this protest over the past several days. But the protest leaders are not buying that, and that they don't want this agreement to be signed in their name. And that if Hamdok continues to make deals with the military leaders, this will now be his own business, and that the protest movement is not part of it. The only thing that the protest movement will accept is for al-Burhan to hand power over to the professionals and the civil society movement that was genuinely part of that coalition, which they overthrew a month ago.
You know, in as much as we see a bit of stability, being restored in Sudan, but what is not clear at this point is how much power the reinstated Prime Minister and his cabinet of technocrats will have. And in as much as, there's a bit of stability, but this will be a key factor in determining the way forward.
Well, determining the way forward, I'm not so sure, because if the protests don't relent, then Hamdok's premiership of this government will be almost tantamount to nothing. Most especially that the military rulers had attempted to create a council of military leaders that represent all corners of Sudan, including Blue Nile and Kordofan and Darfur, with an eye to possibly making this look like a representative government that could lead to stability. But stability is not going to come under these circumstances if the protest leaders are not going to be on board, and most especially if they are going to call on the regional leaders like Mal Gagar from Blue Nile and leaders from South Kordofan, leaders from Darfur. If they call on them and say that this agreement that has just been signed to recreate a coalition government has betrayed the aspirations of the general public, I don't think stability is coming to Sudan. The Sudan is not out of the woods yet. What remains to be seen is how much pressure will the protests continue to bring to bear? How much pressure will the outside world will bring onto Hamdok in his new dispensation to ensure that democracy is kicked off and marching towards that end?
Well, Dr. Jok, you seem to be quite pessimistic about, the restoration of stability in Sudan. But let's talk about the rules governing the transition towards democracy and the likelihood of whether those rules will be restored.
Right. Well, so first of all, the government, the agreement that was just signed Sunday night, it speaks of a shared administration. It speaks of release of political detainees. It speaks of a transitional period which will end in elections. Those were the same rules that were in place in 2019 in that coalition. If the military was simply looking for those, why did they have to overthrow anything? But because they have done this, they have now created a lot of mistrust between the civilian leaders and the military, between the public that is protesting and the government. So that means that doesn't bode well for stability going forward. The rules are just simply not being respected.
And then what about the international community? What's your reflections of how well they've received this news? Because we know that, the World Bank has frozen aid to Sudan and the African Union has taken a stance against Sudan. So will this be a welcome news, in particular for international organizations and the international community?
Not at all. If it doesn't persuade the protesters to go back home, it will be meaningless to have a recognition that things have happened. What I know is that there was a lot of pressure coming from outside on the military leaders, and that pressure has now culminated in them signing this agreement. But this agreement falls way short of what the protesters want. So no amount of international pressure will sway the Sudanese people to put down their stones and protests that they are staging. And so long as they are continuing to mount these demonstrations day in, day out, the current coalition government that is being set up will probably not last for very long.
And what's the word on the ground? Are Sudanese people wary, or do they trust the transitional leaders?
No, not anymore. Not even Hamdok himself is trusted anymore by protesters, because in the coalition government of 2019, Hamdok had emphasized the inclusion of the diaspora so much that it was beginning to anger the protest leaders for being excluded from that government, especially young people and women. It seems Hamdok is repeating the same mistake by simply accepting this agreement because the military generals are feeling a pinch of the international pressures. So they call on Hamdok to simply sign something that is not satisfactory to the ordinary public. So I don't think they are going to agree. They are simply just going to continue to protest until either Hamdok and military generals revise the agreement, or the military generals simply decide that they've had enough and retreat to the barracks, which they should do, because the people of Sudan are fed up with the military rule.
Now, Dr. Jok, just a final question. What's your thoughts on the Forces of Freedom and Change civilian coalition's calls that those who carried out and backed the coup should face justice? Will this not fly in the face of reconciliation and charting a way forward for Sudan?
Well, it depends on what power the coalition has. If they manage to wrestle power from the military and from the Prime Minister himself by means of this continued protest, then they will run the country, and as a result, they will be in a position to prosecute those people who supported the coup. But until they come into power, I don't see how they would be able to punish those people who supported the coup if those people who supported the coup are now supporters of the military leaders. It doesn't make sense that they should be issuing threats about who they will prosecute when they have not come to power yet. They should wait until they are in office.
Dr. Jok Madut Jok, lovely chatting to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
All right, that was Dr. Jok Madut Jok. He is a professor of citizenship and public affairs at the Syracuse University and has been joining us live from New York in the United States.